So what we're going to do in this hour is we're just going to go through kind of a run through of some key areas that we want you to be thinking about and paying attention to. Now, I do have a hard stop at 11 o'clock. And so this is the first time I've rolled this class out. If there are still things and it generates discussion, which I suspect it might, if it generates discussion, what I'd encourage you to do is jump in on my office hours later today or Monday. I have an office hour today at 3 o'clock. I have another one on Monday, and we can kind of talk about these things. I want to make sure that we keep this conversation going. But I've called this risk management, AKA how to avoid being sued, right? And so what we're going to cover is, what are we talking about with risk management? We're going to go through some definitions. We're going to cover some common risk areas, right? We're going to talk about some best practice standards, things that we think, that I believe are sort of examples of what best practice looks like. And I'm going to try to kind of tie this all together with some New Jersey Real Estate Commission findings and some disciplinary actions that they've taken, just so you can kind of get a sense of how the state and the Real Estate Commission look at some of these topics as well. So I pulled this page from the Ignite course, and we always start every beginning session of Ignite starts with, what do successful agents focus on every day? Growing their business, running their business. And if you'll notice, point number 7 in the Ignite course material on the run your business side of the day speaks to compliance and risk management. This is just something that every agent does if they want to have a successful real estate career. And so, quick definition, what are we talking about? What is risk management? Well, from a business standpoint, we're talking about the forecasting and the evaluation of financial risks, together with the identification of procedures to avoid and minimize their impact. That's a whole lot of mumbo jumbo. For risk management is figuring out the areas that I can get into trouble and finding ways to make sure that that doesn't happen. So in the real estate space, you know, what exactly are we talking about? What are the risks in the real estate space? Well, there's actions that can leave you open to code of ethics violations, right? Now, code of ethics violations are things that would be typically adjudicated at the board level. These are violations of the real estate code of ethics. And I have sat on many boards of grievance committees or standards committees that adjudicate these kinds of things at the board level. And when it's a code of ethics violation, typically what happens is the board's role is to try to remediate by getting you more education, right? They're not in a position to find anybody or to suspend your license or anything like that. They just want to make sure that you know how to do a better job. So there are code of ethics violations that are out there. There's also the kinds of violations that could leave you open to violation of state law. And this can include the New Jersey Real Estate New Jersey Real Estate Commission laws. It can include fair housing laws. It can include anti-discrimination laws, consumer protection laws. For the most part, these kinds of infractions are usually reported to the state. The state investigates. They're typically adjudicated at the state real estate commission level. And the state does have and will require additional education, additional training. They will sometimes fine. They will, in the most egregious cases, either suspend or revoke an agent's license. And so those are things that we need to be cognizant of as well. And finally, actions that can get you open to civil litigation, being sued, right? And guys, you know, I have been around this industry for 18 years, and I know that this is a very litigious society out there. Many, many times, things that people sue you for may not really be infractions of the rules or infractions of the law. That doesn't necessarily mean that someone won't bring you into a courtroom environment. So we have to kind of know all those different areas as well. Now, we do have, as professionals, errors and omissions insurance. And let's just touch on what that is. It's a requirement to work really in the real estate industry here in New Jersey. It's insurance that covers liabilities for mistakes and errors or negligence that occur in the listing and selling activities of a real estate office. So the real estate brokerage will own the policy, and as an agent, you will come in and you will pay your pro rata share to be covered under that policy. But what does E&O cover? It covers, well, let's talk about what it doesn't cover. It doesn't cover financial or punitive damages. If you get fined, your E&O is not going to cover that. It's going to cover if you made a mistake. It's going to cover if you made an error. It will not cover negligence or misrepresentation when the agent was found to act willfully or recklessly or in bad faith. Right. So one of the things that we just have to understand is E&O is there. It's there to protect us when we make mistakes, but that does not absolve us from mistakes that we knew better or should have known better as a professional real estate agent. So I went to Inman News as I was starting to think about this course, and I went to all of the brokers in your market centers and started to talk about where are the common areas that they see issues coming up. And I went to Inman News, who had an article on the most common areas of agent liability, and here's where they come up. In no particular order, but very commonly we have failure to disclose property defects. We have breaches of fiduciary duty. We have giving legal advice or tax advice, right? We're not lawyers, we're not CPAs, and yet sometimes we advise people on what they can and can't do from these perspectives, and that's an area of problems, right? Giving confusing or misleading information to clients. And this is a really slippery area because many, many times what happens is people rely on us to gain clarity so that they can make the best decision for themselves. And if we do not have sufficient knowledge and we provide information that's unclear or misleading and they make a wrong decision, there's going to be potential liability there, right? Failure to protect client data, that's increasingly becoming a thing. And that's thinking about things like, you know, not in the old days when we used to have client files and client records, right? And you would leave those records in the office, hopefully, and not take those records out. But now in a digital world, when we've got client data and we've got information on our computers, on our iPads, on our phones, our digital space is adequately protected. If someone hacked into your computer and got access to your client's data, that is an area of liability, right? Bodily injury. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about bodily injury here today, but that includes things like not making sure that the sidewalk is shoveled on a snowy day when you're having an open house and you invite a guest to come who slips on the sidewalk and falls down. That's an area of liability, right? These are kind of the most common ones, and we're going to spend some time with the ones that I believe and your brokers believe we should be talking about most. And so let's start with failure to disclose, because hands down, that's the biggest place where agents find themselves in challenge, right? The most common areas for problems is in disclosure, and some common disclosure areas include property condition, right? Just failing to disclose things that are known about the property and the condition of the property. And they include things like hardwood floors under the carpet. I see Linda on the call here. You and I have talked about this, haven't we, Linda? Right? If you guys don't know Linda, Linda is not in production. She's part of our BCP leadership team. She's the admin who works with Al Donahue and Joanne Morganroth and kind of keeps a lot of the things moving behind the scenes. She's going to keep me honest today, so I'm glad she's here, right? Guys, hardwood floors. You see a carpet, you come into the house, the seller tells you that there is hardwood floors under the carpet. What is your obligation as a real estate agent? There's 10 of us in the room right now. I'd love somebody to unmute or to put in chat. What is your obligation when a seller tells you there's hardwood floors? Anybody?
To peek.
To peek. What does that mean, peek? You're right. How do we peek?
Take up a little side of the corner of the carpet.
Yeah, exactly right. We've got to go in. We've got to say, look, I'm glad to see that. I need to verify that, right? Because I'm going to certify that they're here. And one of the things that you have to understand is many times homes have additions on them. And part of the home has hardwood floors, but the add-on section doesn't. And so we've got to make sure that hardwood floors exist. We've got to check to make sure it's there. We just peel a little bit of the carpet back and check that out to make sure that's really there before we sign off on the seller's disclosure form that attests to the fact that that hardwood is there. Guys, I just want to talk about the disclosure for just a moment. That in consumer protection laws in the state of New Jersey require that a seller disclose anything of a material nature that could impact a buyer's desire to have that home and to own that home. And so anything that could impact that's of a material nature is required to be disclosed if asked. What the real estate industry has done is simplify that process by putting a questionnaire together. And we can go through section by section by section, fill out what we know, fill out, things like that, what we don't know, all that stuff. The consumer is the consumer is not required to fill out that form. It is something that we want to see as company policy. We want that form filled out. And if you get a lot of blowback on filling out that form, I would direct you back to your brokers on how to handle that. But they're not required by law to fill out the form. They are still required to disclose. And so failing to fill out the form does not absolve the responsibility to share that information when asked. Now, sometimes you have an estate sale. Sometimes the property is one where the person who's entrusted with selling the house just doesn't really know. I have been the executor for several estates in my family through the years, and I've never lived in those homes. And there is a place where an executor can put on that form that they've never personally lived in that home, so they can't specifically answer any questions and buyer do their own due diligence. But what you need to know as a real estate professional is that you are required to sign as a licensee that says, this is what the seller has disclosed, and I, to the best of my knowledge, have checked things out and concur that what they have said is accurate. That is what you are doing when you are signing that required signature on that form. All right? So make sure when people tell you that there's hardwood under the carpet, make sure you check. Here's another area, water penetration and mold. One of the things that you're going to hear me say again and again and again is if you see red flags, if you go down into the basement and you see evidence that looks like there's water that's penetrated through the walls of that foundation, how would you know? What would you look for, guys? What would give you a tip-off that maybe there's been some water down here?
Maybe an odor.
What's that?
Odor, smell.
An odor, a smell. It smells moldy. It smells musty. What else? That's a good one. What else could you look for? Stains on the wall, right? The calcification sometimes on the walls that would show that water's kind of leached through there, right? And so if you see something like that, if you see a red flag, it's your obligation to ask questions. And many, many times people would say, oh, we never really had any water in this basement. And yet you go downstairs and you say, I see stains on the paneling at about the 4-inch mark that would indicate that there's been water here. We've got to ask questions and we've got to get clarification, right? That's another common area. Abandoned oil tanks. We know that that's become such a hot button issue right now. Very rarely do we see attorneys for the buyer allow a property to be sold if there's any question about a tank. Many times we'll have buyers who will do a tank sweep just to be sure. But if you see any kind of indication that perhaps there was an oil fill line that's come through the foundation wall that seems to indicate that perhaps there had been a tank here, then we've got to ask those questions. Guys, one of the things that as a licensee, you do not have to become as a general contractor. One of the things that you do have to become is knowledgeable about what you're looking at, right? You're knowledgeable about what you're looking at. The Real Estate Commission expects that you know your product of homes well enough that you can identify areas of potential red flags. Abandoned oil tanks is another one. Septic and well issues is another one, right? One of the big challenges that I found when I was actively selling back in the early 2000s out in Somerset and Hunterdon County, here's what happened. A lot of homes were built, and maybe they were built to be 3-bedroom, 1.5-bath homes, and over time, people have added to them. They've added another bathroom. They've added another bedroom. And yet that septic system was never rated for that many occupants, and there's a mismatch. And many, many times what I found was that we were selling a home that was being used as a 4-bedroom home with 2 bathrooms, and the septic system was only rated for a 3-bedroom home with 1 bathroom. That's a problem. That is a challenge. And so septic systems, well issues, we've got to ask questions about these, right? And we're going to go in a minute or two to what kind of documentation you're going to be looking for to make sure that you've got the right information, right? Well issues. Has the well ever had problems? Has the well ever been dry? My wife talks about when she moved to Warren, New Jersey from Delaware, that they moved into their home and they were in their home for only one day when they came to find out that the well was dry. Now here's mom and dad moving into town with two little girls. I believe they were like 7 and 9 at that time. And there was no running water. And they had to go out and kind of get buckets of water from the local gas station. And everyone in the neighborhood said, oh, that house has had problems with wells forever. It was never disclosed. It was a major lawsuit. That's something we've got to be asking about. Pending changes to property taxes. What could change the property tax assessment? What kinds of things could change the property tax? Anybody have some thoughts around that?
Additional structures,
Yeah.
updates.
One of the reasons why the building department comes out to inspect these additions and these add-ons is not only to make sure that they're done safely, but so that the town recognizes that you've improved the value of the home, that there's going to be additional taxes paid. And so sometimes there's been work that's been done without permits that when the town catches up with it is going to trigger an additional tax bill. If your buyer's buying that house thinking that the taxes that they're going to pay is the taxes they're going to pay, and suddenly they find that they get a bigger tax bill because of an improvement that was there when they bought it, but that they didn't have permitted and the town didn't know about it, there's liability there, right? Pending changes to taxes can also include things like every year, do the taxes in New Jersey go up or do they come down? Well, there's usually one direction, and that usually happens at a predictable time of year. And many times the information that might exist in the MLS printout sheet is not necessarily the same as the tax bill that the buyer is going to receive. And so if the buyer is not clued in and doesn't know what the actual taxes are going to be when they buy, if they're relying on us and we don't provide that information, there's potential liability there. Some more common areas: providing incomplete, misleading information, right? Let me give an example of this. This is actually a finding from the New Jersey Real Estate Commission, and this actually was from. Actually, it's a current docket right now. It's actually still being in the works. You can go to the New Jersey Real Estate Commission's website if you want to. You can just take a look for violations. And this is a current one. And here's what happened. There's a real estate agent who recognized that when she took this listing that there was mold in the basement, and she had conversations with the sellers, and the sellers sort of said, you know what, if there's mold problems, we're going to remediate those. And so when the buyers came and took a look at it, they sort of acknowledged and told the buyers, yeah, when you do your inspection, we're going to see what happens. The buyers are going to take care of any kind of mold issues there. And then here's what happened. The inspector came, they had an inspection done. And it was actually the listing seller did the inspection and provided those results to the buyers. And what the inspection revealed was there was no evidence of mold on the first floor. However, there was some evidence of problems in a crawl space in the basement. And what the agent chose to do, at probably the seller's urging, to say, look, this report sort of says there's no real evidence of mold here in this house on pages 2 and 3. And so those are the pages that they shared with the buyer and the buyer's agent. And they said, look, here's what the report says. There's really no evidence of mold. And the buyer said, but what about the basement? And they went back and they talked to the inspector themselves. And the inspector said, oh no, page 5 and 6 outlined where the mold was in the basement, right? Now that's not an error. That's fraud. And a violation of consumer protection laws is treble damages, meaning whatever the damage is that you would be found, guilty of, multiply that by 3. And that's what you're going to pay for. And because it was a willful act, it's not covered under your E&O insurance. Don't do that, right? What we've got to do is when we've got materials, any kind of information that needs to be shared, the good, the bad, and the ugly, share all of it. Don't provide misleading or incomplete information, right? Zoning rules. One of the things that happens a lot is people look at a property and they're like, boy, I would really love to put a swimming pool in this backyard. And agents say to them, oh, it's a big backyard. Lots of people in the neighborhood have swimming pools. And they buy the house and they go to get the pool put in. And what they find out is that there's lot coverage requirements. right? One of the things that towns do in an effort to manage water runoff is they make sure that there's enough of that property that is sort of permeable land, that water can get seeping into the ground, that we don't cover it with pavement, that we don't cover it with patios, that we don't cover it with buildings, that we don't cover it with swimming pools. And so I know of many situations where people intended to build a swimming pool only to find out once they own the home that the town would not let them do it, or let them do it at the size that they wanted to, or the location that they wanted to. That's a liability issue, right? Setback rules. How close to the edge of the property can I build? You've got to know in the market where you're selling, you've got to know what are the zoning requirements? How can this property be used? Can it be rented? Can it be used for a mixed use property? Are there going to be restrictions on how that lot can be used? As a licensee, you're expected to know. What's in a flood zone? What's not in a flood zone? Will there be flood insurance required? Guys, we have right at your fingertips, Carnegie Title, who can help you figure this out. Just reach out to Brian or Lisette and try to find out, because here's what's happening is flood laws are changing. And in a world where there are more and more sort of natural disasters, if you will, and there's more flooding, and there's more fires, and there's more things happening, these insurance companies are saying, oh my God, we're paying out, we're paying out, we're paying out. We got to get money coming in. How do we get money coming in? We get it through premiums. And what is very commonplace in New Jersey is that people are living in an area that doesn't particularly flood. Maybe their area is rated in a 100-year floodplain, right? What a 100-year floodplain doesn't mean is if it flooded last year, there's 99 more years before you have to worry about it again. What a 100-year floodplain means is that on average, we would expect there to be a 1% chance that this property would flood this year. It's a low risk, technically. However, if an insurance company needs to generate more revenue because they're paying for fires in California and because they're paying for flooding in Hurricane Sally and all those different things, they sometimes change the threshold in terms of where do we need to start collecting money so we've got enough. Many times, people who are not paying flood insurance currently are grandfathered in under their existing policy, but the next guy in is going to pay flood insurance. And that has to be properly disclosed or there's liability. Off-site conditions. I'll give you another example here. Here's another example, right from the New Jersey Real Estate Commission. And this is an agent who in 2017, what happened was she had sold a property to a family moving from Staten Island to New Jersey. And one of the reasons that they were leaving Staten Island is because homes were really close together and they wanted more space. And they had looked for a long time. They probably looked at 30, 40, 50 homes until they found the home of their dreams, which was on a very park-like property. And that was one of their search criteria. We want to have the sense of space. We want to have the sense of not having people right on top of us. And so they bought this property because right behind it was like a forest. It was all these woods. Only to find out that about a year after they moved in, they started to see some yellow tape go up on some of the trees behind their home. And what they started to find out was that those trees were being torn down because that entire parcel of land was being developed into a condo and a townhouse project. And when the person's like, hold up, wait, what? This is not what I expected. And started to talk to the neighbors, and the neighbors said, yeah, that information's been out for years and years and years. The previous owners knew that. The agent, when the lawsuit went to court, and what they found was the agent was aware of that because the agent actually went to the town planning meetings to try to meet the developer, to try to become the agent on this project. And yet that was not disclosed as an off-site condition. And I don't know what the penalties were in terms of the civil action and what the damages were there, because what the new buyer did was invested almost $40,000 in new trees at the border of his property to try to recreate a buffer zone. I don't know if that became part of his damages, which would have been treble damages. But what I do know is that the agent was required to complete 3 hours of continuing education and was fined $2,500. And so we have to know off-site conditions, guys. We always want to make sure that people do their diligence, but as a licensee, the expectation is that you know what's going on, right? Licensing status of the parties. We know that when we're involved in a real estate transaction, we're required to disclose that we have real estate license, that we are expected to have a higher level of knowledge of this process than the average consumer. And so we need to let the parties know that we do have that level of knowledge. Well, if your client has a license or a license in a referral status, that has to be disclosed as well, right? That can be an area of litigation. Conflicts of interest, what can that look like? Let me ask you guys. I want to try to get a little interaction here. It's 10:30. What would a conflict of interest, what could be a conflict of interest area? How might that look? Where there's a conflict of interest for you in a specific transaction? Any thoughts about that?
If I was selling my mom's house?
Mm-hmm. Selling a family member's house? Okay. And you know, I'm a big fan of always disclosing. Disclose. That's something that you probably would want to disclose. What other areas might be a conflict?
Buying for yourself or for a nonprofit organization or something.
Okay, could be, right? Nonprofit organization, especially if you have a relationship with that organization, if you're a board member or something like that. You know, I pulled a section out of, this was just a page out of the current Kovacs Real Estate Training Manual. It's the manual that I use to rely on a lot. I am a licensed real estate instructor. I haven't taught the pre-licensing class in a while, but there's a section in here that refers to an agent, okay, who's a listing agent, representing the seller, and a buyer came to purchase the home represented by another agent. So we didn't have dual agency here. However, the buyer was someone who had a business relationship, a business partner relationship with the listing agent. Different business, unrelated to this real estate transaction, but had some business dealings together. And the real estate commission found that failure to disclose as the listing agent that he knew who the buyer was and had business transacted with the buyer, that was a violation of disclosure, right? That was a conflict of interest. And so, rule of thumb, guys, if you have any questions, is this not a conflict of interest? Call your broker. Just get on the phone with your broker. If you don't know who your broker is, figure that out today. Sally Ponchak in Ridgewood, Jack Kumbas in Tenafly, right? We've got Randy in Woodcliff Lake. We've got Edward Kim in Fort Lee, and we've got Robert O'Keefe in Tenafly, in Rutherford. Call your broker and just have that question. Is there anything here that I should be concerned about? Because I know this person from this setting. We have a relationship in this context. Is there a potential conflict of interest? When in doubt, disclose, right? The words of my favorite chef broker, Jack Kumbas, when in doubt, disclose. It's just a really good rule. Now, some best practice.
How do you disclose? You text, you email the person, is there a disclosure? I know there's a disclosure one, but if you know the person, I know this person for 10 years, came with another broker.
I would disclose in writing, right? Anything that you want to disclose, you want to have a paper trail to show that you've disclosed, right? So I would a couple different places. If it's a contract, I might disclose that in the other sections of the contract, just additional provisions of the contract, just to tuck that disclosure in there. Or at minimum, have a written disclosure that is, you have an evidence that was delivered. I think sometimes email disclosures can be good that way if you have evidence of receipt, that sort of thing. Couple things though, best practice, always get the seller's disclosure completed, right? Now you can't complete it, no helping. This is them. They have to complete it. You have to see what they said. You have to check it out yourself. You got to make sure that everything lines up. But what you cannot do is have the person dictate and you complete it for them, because there's a chance that you're going to make a mistake and actually misdisclose. So you cannot help them do this. Right? But get the seller's disclosure done, look for any red flags, confront any red flags, always qualify any disclosures that you make about the property as not necessarily being absolute truth, but where you got your information from. According to the seller, there's never been any evidence of water in the basement. As per the current tax records, this is what the tax bill is for 2020. Always disclose the source of where that information came, as opposed to Just owning this is my opinion, right? Good rule of thumb, always be the source of the source, right? We didn't actually get into in this class, and maybe I'll tuck it in. This is kind of the pilot version. Maybe next time I'll tuck in some of the biggest lawsuits in New Jersey have to do around schools, where parents buy a home in a district thinking that their children are going to go to a specific middle school because that was what was disclosed by the agent, only to find out that the year their child goes to school, that school is maxed out and they're at capacity. There's no more room. And so for maybe 2 or 3 years, their children are going to go to a different school. Probably one of the very biggest real estate lawsuits in New Jersey was just that scenario in Montville, New Jersey, between Weichert Realtors and Coldwell Banker, where the Coldwell Banker agent who was listing the property was told by the builder that people that are going to live in this house are going to go to this school. And it didn't turn out that way, right? Always be the source of the source. When people ask you, where will my kids go to school? Point them to where they can find out. Encourage them to do their diligence. Do not put that into the listing, unless there's only one school. If it's a town that only has one high school, you can put that in. If there's a town that only has one intermediate school, you can put that in. But anytime there's multiple, do not put that into the listing agreement or into the MLS. Be the source of where people can find that, right? And qualify your statements. Be knowledgeable about the offsite conditions. Know what's going on in the master plan. Know what areas are going to be developed. I have a friend of mine who owns a garden center here in town, about 5 miles from where I live. And he has a big tract of land that's been in his family for a very long time. And I know for a fact that the town of Westfield has their eyes on that property, and he intends to sell off part, if not all, of that parcel to develop moderate income housing. And if you live around the edges of that property, it is very wooded. It is very park-like. And some of those houses are fairly affluent. But that could be another scenario where someone moves in and suddenly says, hey, hold up. How come nobody told me about this? We encourage people to do their own diligence. The buyer needs to be aware, but you are the licensee. You need to be more aware. Okay? What else? Always encourage your clients to do their diligence. Always provide complete third-party reports, unlike the agent who only shared pages 2 and 3 of the mold report, because that's what looked more favorable to her cause. Send all of the reports, right? Be aware of the conflicts of interest. And if you're not sure, ask, bring it to your broker. Be willing to walk away from any transaction where you're asked to do something inappropriate, where you're asked to conceal information. Yeah. You know what? We did that job without permits, but don't tell anybody. We're not going to do anything about that. Yeah, we have water every time it rains. We get water in the basement, but we're not going to tell anybody. No, there's no single transaction that is worth losing your license. And so you're better off walking away and saying, you know what? This is not for me, right? Okay, let's change gears. Let's talk about breach of fiduciary duty for a minute. Again, fiduciary duty, that's that part of real estate school, which is not always the most exciting for folks. If you remember the abbreviation old car, that helps me remember what the fiduciary responsibilities are: obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting. What does accounting have to do with it? It has to do with how do we handle our clients' money. I have a couple of good friends who are actually real estate commission inspectors. They had been managers with me in other companies through the years, and they found their way into the real estate commission as field inspectors. And they will tell me that one of the things that will pretty much automatically get your license suspended, if not revoked, is mishandling people's money. If you collect an escrow check and walk around with it in your files for a week, as opposed to getting it into the right deposit account of the right escrow agent, that's going to cause your license to get suspended, right? So accounting, and then finally, reasonable care. Reasonable care, have you done everything that the public would expect would be reasonable for a licensee to do to protect them? So let's look at some of the breach of fiduciary issues, some common problem areas here. Failing to present all offers. This is one that I see a lot. And I see it because sometimes we get offers that come in and they're just really low and they're really kind of crummy offers. And we're like, I'm not presenting that mess to my seller. You come back with something more serious. Otherwise, I'm not wasting anybody's time. Guys, you cannot do that. You cannot do that. All offers have to be presented. When you're in the works with an offer, and maybe you've done a final and best, a multiple bid situation. Multiple bids can be one of the most problematic areas for a fiduciary, which is why you should always include your brokers into the conversation to let them know how you're approaching multiple bid situations. As a member of professional standards in the Hunterdon Somerset board for years, one of the biggest grievances that came to the board was from agents who felt they were not treated fairly in a multiple bid situation. And what sometimes happens is we do a final and best, we've come to a decision, we're in a turn of review, and then somebody throws another offer in, and we immediately say, all right, we already got one. We'll keep yours around as backup, but we don't present it. You can't do that. Failure to present offers is one of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest mistakes as a fiduciary, as is disclosing too much. Guys, I think it was Winston Churchill that said, loose lips sink ships. Many, many times agents don't even intend to say some of the things that they say that tip off too much information about their client's motivation. I hear it happen in team meetings sometimes where we're introducing a new listing to the office and we want people to know about it. And we say stuff like, yeah, we're listing the house for $579. That's not my number. I told them not to go above 550, but they want to test the market. But guys, bring me anything close to 550 and I'll try to make something work. Guys, you have violated so many parts of your fiduciary responsibility for confidentiality there, right? And again, as a member of the Hunterdon Somerset Standards Committee, many times what would get in front of us was when a homeowner came to find out that their agent had said stuff like that and filed an ethics charge, right? So you can't communicate anything about their eagerness, about their willingness. You can't say as a buyer, hey, my buyers will come up, or whatever, without consent. So make sure that you get permission before you share anything. Failing to accurately maintain MLS statuses. This one comes up a lot. It doesn't always get adjudicated, but you guys and I both know that this is out there. And what sometimes happens is that something goes from an active status into an ARIP or an under contract status. And sometimes an agent who recognizes that the moment it goes into under contract, it's going to fall off of the Zillow website or the Trulia website, and they want to get more leads. So they kind of let it hang out there a little bit longer. That's a misrepresentation. And that is a violation not only of MLS rules, but a code of ethics rules. And depending on the situation, it can be a violation of state statutes. There is a settlement right here, comes right off of the Jersey Real Estate Commission page, where there was an agent, had a contract failed, right? But he had a backup offer. And so he went back and he talked to the other person and said, hey, this deal that we had just fell apart. Is your buyer still interested? And the buyer kind of thought about it for a while. They went back and forth for about a week and they eventually put that deal together. However, the listing agent never changed the status from under contract back to active. And there was another buyer in the marketplace who wanted that property, who was waiting for that property, who wanted to see if that deal was going to fail. They wanted a shot at that property. And because the agent never changed the status back to active and simply went to the under contract backup, well, the fine was $3,000 to the agent. It was 6 hours of continuing ed, 3 hours in ethics, and 3 hours in agency, in addition to the licensing requirements to maintain your license. These are 6 additional hours, plus a $3,000 fine to be paid within 30 days for failure to maintain proper MLS status. Guys, we've got to do the right thing, and we've got to keep on top of that.
Now, what's an ARIP?
Attorney review in progress. Frequently, many MLSs have a flag, like an asterisk. They don't change it to under contract status, which indicates that the attorney review is completed. But they do put a little flag to say, hey, we've got one here, and we're in attorney review, heads up, right? And, okay, now here's another one. Failure to follow up with vendors and ensure that the transaction is moving smoothly. There is, let's see if I can find it here. Yeah, this again comes out of the COVATS manual. This is a scenario where buyer agent had, a buyer had reached out to a lender and it was not a lender that they really knew, didn't have really a relationship with. They had a 45-day window to get their commitment. And when the 45 days came and went, no commitment came. And when the agent started to track down the lender, what the lender said is, your buyer has not submitted any of the documentation yet. We've been after them for weeks and weeks and weeks. They've not submitted anything. There's no way in the world we're going to close on time. And the seller, who needed that deal to happen because they needed the proceeds from that sale to buy their next house, not only did their sale get delayed, but they lost the home that they wanted to buy because they could not close on time. And the damages were significant. And so what happened was the agent was found liable for not doing the diligence of staying in touch with the vendor. And a lot of times we hand it over, we say, well, this is their expertise, but you are the one with the license. And it is your responsibility to make sure that they're on top of things. And if they're not, that you communicate that to the parties. Just so that you know, I just need to let everybody know that the buyer is probably, that we're not going to hit this date. I heard from the lender that we're not going to hit the commitment date because this, that, and the other thing. That needs to be communicated to the parties, right? So failing to follow up with vendors can be an area of fiduciary liability. Here's another one, improper access to the property. There is a situation right here, and this is pending. This is one where the agent is asked to produce records to talk about what happened. And it seems on some levels kind of sort of innocent. The property was scheduled to close at 1 o'clock. The buyer wanted to gain access to the property to take some measurements. And so the buyer's agent had access to the lockbox key. They did their walkthrough, but the buyer's agent had somewhere to go and left the buyer unattended in the property before the closing had happened and said, just lock up when you leave. I'll see you at the attorney's office at 12:30. But the seller had not removed all of their possessions yet. And while nothing was alleged to have been stolen, the seller said, what the heck is that person doing in my house? I didn't give permission for them to be there. You didn't ask me. And that is improper access. And that is one that the Real Estate Commission is investigating and is asking to produce records and prove to us why we should not fine you or suspend your license, because you provided access to a home without the right authorizations. Failing to maintain current market knowledge, right? That's reasonable care. Reasonable care is making sure that we're on top of things and we're doing the right things. As the market changes, are we staying current? Failure to assess, to adequately secure client data is increasingly becoming an area of liability for agents. The beauty of using DocuSign and the beauty of using .loop is that everything is kind of locked down. It's buttoned down. It's protected. The information that you keep outside of that is really, really dangerous. Everything that you have should be included into the secure platform of DocuSign, of .loop, and eventually Command when we start to do it that way. Anything that you keep on your own laptop, anything that you keep on your phone, you better make sure that you can keep it protected, because if somehow someone hacks into it, there's going to be problems, right? More best practice, go the extra mile. What does the extra mile look like? It looks like the loneliest part of the walk because there's nobody else there but you, right? But when you go the extra mile, check with the town. Make sure that you know whether there's open permits or missing permits for work that's been done. Check with the town and know what the zoning and land use requirements are. What would be required? How much frontage do you have to subdivide the property? How much lot coverage do you need to maintain? And can you put in a pool? How big a pool could you put in? All those things. Check with the town that the taxes that are reflected in your listing materials are in fact the taxes that the buyer will be paying, right? Obtain the key documents, just get copies, surveys, any kind of legal findings, right? Any kind of association bylaws, things that would give you assurance that you're providing all the information. Get those documents and have those documents on file. If you're not sure what to get, call your brokers. This is why they're there, right? And they will guide you. Fiduciary best practice, trouble areas can also continue to be around environmental issues. Do we recognize asbestos when we see it? Do we recognize mold when we see it? Damage or defects to the property, do we know what we're looking at with settlement cracks? You're never asked to go above your pay grade, and you can't go above your pay grade. You can't say, based on the cracks that I'm seeing in the wall, you should not buy this house because this is not structurally sound. You don't have the authority to say that. What you do say is, based on what I'm seeing in the wall, if this is a home that you want to have interest in, we're going to need to have that evaluated, right? But you're expected to recognize what you're looking at. And when you're giving recommendations, always give multiple names. You may have your favorite inspector and you love to use this inspector, and so you just refer him all the time. However, maybe one time he really screwed it up. And if you didn't give multiple choices to your buyer and ask your buyer to do their own diligence, there's liability there. Always give multiple names and encourage people to do their own diligence. Never, 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 never give advice above your pay grade. Legal advice, tax advice, environmental advice, structural advice. Never tell a seller what you're going to be able to get for the home. I took this listing, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I can get you $550 for this house. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Never, never, never tell a buyer what to offer. You know what, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, the house is listed for $475. There's multiple bids. I think if you go to $480, you're going to be fine. Only to find out that the home sold for $490. Well, you were the one that advised them to go to $480. $480 didn't get it done. Now they lost their dream house, and who's to blame? There's liability there, guys. We always have to guide people to where they're comfortable going, where their walkaway number is, but we can't advise ever what people should offer. Always be upgrading your skills. Guys, if you're in this class, that's your mindset. I love it that you're here. And some of you guys are frequent flyers. I see you again and again and again, and you're constantly sharpening your saw, but you've got to do that. Last 10 minutes, we're going to talk about fair housing. And I'm going to develop this deeper. There is so much going on right now in our own company on how do we address issues of race and issues of bias in the world and in our company. And you have recently seen that Keller Williams International just adopted a plank where they actually included equity, opportunity for all people as one of our core company values. And we have our own Bergen County partners, racial equity ambassadors, who are looking at how do we live that out in our lives as agents. And so there will be more coming on this, but just some key areas on anti-discrimination. Common problem areas are steering folks into specific neighborhoods. Now, we know that steering is wrong. And yet, sometimes we don't even necessarily know that we're doing it intentionally, but we find ourselves leaning into certain areas based on price or whatever it is. Steering is a problem, guys. There was a study that was done on Long Island over 3 years that was released in 2019. It was done by Newsday Magazine. They looked at 92 client interactions with real estate agents across every single company brand over 3 years. And what they found was, guys, 49% of the time, 49% of the time, the clients experienced racial discrimination. That's a problem. We got to fix this. Steering, no good. Being inconsistent in pre-qualification. This is an area where we can get into trouble. You know what, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I need to see a pre-qualification or pre-approval letter before I can take you out and see properties. If that is your stand, which is not a bad stand, you better be applying that across the board with all of your clients, because if you have a client who you know is a Wall Street hotshot, has the money of life, and is going to be taking out a mortgage, if you don't ask that person, but you do ask for pre-qualification from the first-time home buyer, you're discriminating. Be careful, right? Consistency is key, right? Being inconsistent in the services that you offer. Do you do things the same way for everyone? That can be an area of problems. Failure to accurately interpret the risks of certain lending vehicles like FHA. Guys, this was a bit of a wake-up call for me recently. Because, you know, we look at loans and we look at mortgages and we say, okay, this person is putting down 20% and going with the conventional financing, and this person is putting down 3% is going with FHA financing. Certainly the person with more money down might be a less of a risk to a seller because there's more cash involved, and so it's less risky for the seller. And we have advised that way. And guys, I may have at some point in my career even coached you to advise that way. And I have to be more conscious of this, because here's what's the truth. Here's what's the truth. FHA loans are certified as loans designed for people who are perfectly creditworthy but don't have the cash. And many, many times, the reasons why they don't have the cash is because of issues of intergenerational wealth and issues of race come into play with all those things. And so if we're steering people to conventional financing over someone who's using FHA financing, we could be guilty of discrimination. It's something we just have to be more aware of. Failure to serve Section 8 clients. Right? Section 8 clients are folks that are getting some of the funding from the Division on Health and Human Services to typically offset some of their rent because they've got disabilities and things like that. And to fail to serve Section 8 clients is a violation, right? Being inconsistent in the speed and the diligence of your follow-up. Guys, this is such a slippery slope. But when we get 2 leads coming in, and one lead has an address of where they live as Alpine, New Jersey, and they're looking to sell their house. And the other person has an address of Newark, New Jersey, and they're looking to sell their house. And we don't necessarily catch up with them consistently. Do we kind of keep tracing the Alpine listing and let the other one go? Because that could be interpreted as discrimination, right? Other problem areas, and we're going to finish up on this slide because we've got 4 minutes and I have a hard stop. Failure to ensure a safe environment for clients. That's back to that bodily injury. If people slip and fall because the property is not being adequately maintained, there can be liability for us as agents. Failure to update the New Jersey Real Estate Commission if you've been convicted of a charge. And my hope is that none of that happens to any of you, but sometimes stuff happens. We're not talking about speeding tickets, but if you got arrested and were convicted of something other than a motor vehicle violation, the Real Estate Commission needs to know. One of the biggest sanctions that I see when I look at the Real Estate Commission is something happened, people didn't update the Real Estate Commission. Being involved in fraudulent activity outside of the real estate. I trust I'm preaching to the choir here, and we don't have anybody that this is an issue for. However, here's how that can look. I saw a situation recently where there had been somebody who was involved in a motor vehicle accident. And when the insurance claim was filed by the other party, the party that they hit, they denied that the accident had occurred. And there was a police report, and they kept reporting to the insurance company, it wasn't me, wasn't me, wasn't me. Well, that was reported by the insurance company to the Real Estate Commission and said, just so that you know, this is the behavior that we're seeing in your agent, and that cost the agent a suspension of their license for 90 days, right? Failing to immediately turn over deposit monies, we talked about that earlier. How you handle someone's money is critical. So in recap, risk management definition, we know what it is. It's kind of anything that could put us in harm's way. Lots of different ways. Board of Realtors, code of ethics violations, state violations, litigation. We know what the common risk areas are. We know what best practice looks like. I've given you some examples of places where the state has actually taken action. Lean in. Just lean into your brokers. Lean into me. Lean into other people. We're all in this together. No one wants anyone to do something that inadvertently gets them into trouble. But your errors and omissions insurance will protect you for errors and omissions. But if you are expected to know better, if your training tells you better, if your clients ask you to do something and in an effort to not disappoint them, you do the wrong thing, your errors and omissions insurance will not protect you. And so I don't want that to happen for anyone.